The boardroom smelled like burnt coffee and polished ego. My manager, Dylan Shaw, stood in front of my presentation, my slides, my months of sleepless nights, and said, "I pulled this strategy together in record time." The CEO leaned back impressed. "You saved the company, Dylan." Everyone clapped. I couldn't move. My throat burned. My heart hammered against my ribs as my own charts flashed behind him. I watched my name vanish under his voice, erased in real time. The financial recovery model that had consumed my life for 3 months was now his triumph. The data analytics that I'd coded from scratch, the predictive algorithms I'd tested through countless iterations, the strategic framework I'd built piece by piece, all of it was being credited to Dylan Shaw. My fingers dug into the edge of the table, nails biting wood. Every cell in me screamed. But I didn't speak. Because if there's one thing I've learned about men like Dylan, they never see quiet women coming. I forced a smile just like he taught me. "Never show weakness in front of executives," he'd said during my first week under his management. Those words felt like poison now. My face stayed calm while my insides twisted into knots. I nodded when the board members congratulated Dylan on his brilliant work. I even said thank you when one of them praised me for supporting such excellent leadership. The words tasted like ash in my mouth. Because if there's one thing I've learned about men like Dylan Shaw, they never see quiet women coming. They mistake silence for acceptance, composure for surrender. They think we're too afraid or too weak to fight back. What they don't understand is that quiet women are often the most dangerous. We watch, we listen, we document everything. And when the moment comes, we don't need to raise our voices. We just need to let the truth speak loud enough to shatter all the lies they've built. That meeting was the day I lost everything. The credit, the promotion, and the respect I'd earned through 2 years of exceptional work at this company. But it was also the day something broke open inside me. Not despair, though I felt that too. Something sharper. Something colder. A determination that settled into my bones like winter frost that wouldn't melt. I'd spent my entire career being the good employee, the team player, the woman who didn't make waves or cause problems. Where had it gotten me? Watching a mediocre manager steal my work while executives applauded him like he was some kind of genius. That night, sitting in my car in the parking garage, I made a decision that would change everything. Dylan Shaw thought he'd won. He thought I'd accept this humiliation quietly, maybe even leave the company out of shame and embarrassment. He was wrong. This wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning of his downfall. My manager took credit for a project that saved the company. The board asked one question. My name is Sloan Pierce. I'm a senior analyst at Apex Dynamics, a mid-sized consulting firm in Chicago. Or I was a senior analyst until that day changed everything. I'm 32 years old, quiet by nature, efficient by training, the kind of employee who keeps her head down and her spreadsheets flawless. I thought merit mattered in corporate America. I thought being exceptional at your job was enough to get ahead. I thought if you worked hard and delivered results, you'd be recognized and rewarded fairly. That illusion shattered the moment Dylan smiled at the board and said, "My project," while presenting work I'd created. I'd grown up believing in fairness and justice. My parents were both teachers who drilled into me the importance of honesty and hard work. "Do good work and good things will follow," my father always said with complete conviction. My mother added, "Don't let people tell your story for you." I'd followed that advice perfectly, until I realized the system wasn't designed for people like me. 3 months earlier, Dylan had called me his secret weapon during a one-on-one meeting in his office. Apex Dynamics was bleeding clients after a costly merger with another consulting firm had failed spectacularly. Our parent company was threatening to shut us down completely if we couldn't turn things around within 90 days. Dylan, as the director of strategy, was responsible for developing a recovery plan that would save the company. Instead of developing anything himself, he'd dumped half his workload on me without hesitation. "We're a team, Sloan," he'd said, leaning back in his expensive leather chair with that easy confidence that came from never having to prove himself. "You'll get your shot when this succeeds. Trust me on this." I believed him completely. Why wouldn't I? He was my manager, my superior. We spent nights building a turnaround model to save the company from bankruptcy. Every formula, every insight, every strategic recommendation came directly from my analysis and research. His contribution, taking credit and polishing my language to sound more executive. The manipulation was subtle at first, so subtle I didn't even recognize it as manipulation. Dylan would ask me to send him my drafts for review, then he'd copy-paste them into emails sent from his account to senior leadership. "I'll handle communications with leadership," he'd explain smoothly. "You focus on the technical work. That's what you're best at, Sloan." He'd CC himself on my emails to clients, then forward them with minor changes and his name prominently at the top. When I presented findings in team meetings, he'd interrupt with, "What Sloan means is," and rephrase my exact words as if clarifying something I'd said incorrectly. At first, I thought he was helping me navigate corporate politics. I was young, relatively new to the corporate world, and I trusted that my manager had my best interests at heart. Later, I realized he was systematically erasing my fingerprints from every piece of work I produced. He was building a narrative where he was the strategic genius, and I was merely his capable assistant who handled the grunt work. The public humiliation started small but grew progressively worse. At a team briefing 2 months into the project, Dylan presented an idea I'd written the night before. A complete framework for client retention based on predictive analytics that I'd developed. I'd sent it to him at midnight after working through dinner, skipping my evening plans to finish it. The next morning, he stood at the whiteboard presenting his approach to client recovery like he'd thought of it himself. He looked straight at me while saying, "Sloane's been helping with data entry and formatting. Great attention to detail on her part." The room laughed. My face burned hot with shame and rage that I couldn't express. But I smiled. That's what good employees do, right? We swallow our pride. We don't make scenes or cause conflict. We certainly don't contradict our managers in front of colleagues. So I smiled and nodded like I was grateful for the acknowledgement, even as something inside me started to crack. Later, a coworker told me Dylan always did this. "He's gone through 3 analysts in 2 years, she whispered. "All brilliant women. All left frustrated." That night, I sat in my car in the parking garage, hands shaking so hard I could barely hold my phone properly. My laptop glowed in the passenger seat, still open to the project files that Dylan had presented as his own work. Tears blurred my vision. Not sad tears. Angry ones. Frustrated ones that came from months of being invisible. My mother's voice echoed in my head clear as day. "Don't let people tell your story for you, Sloan." She'd said that when I was 12, after a boy in my class took credit for my science fair project. I'd let it happen then because I didn't know how to fight back effectively. I was 32 now. I knew better. So I opened a new folder on my laptop, titled it Proof, and started collecting everything I could find. Every email I'd sent Dylan. Every version history of documents I'd created. Every timestamp showing when I developed each piece of the strategy. Screenshots of my original work before his polishing. I didn't know yet what I was building, but I knew I'd need it eventually. Over the next month, I became meticulous about documentation in ways I'd never been before. Every idea I shared with Dylan went into an email sent to myself first, timestamped and saved in multiple locations. Every spreadsheet I built was saved with version control showing my authorship clearly. Every meeting where he presented my work, I took detailed notes with dates and direct quotes of what he said. I wasn't planning revenge. Not exactly. I was planning survival in a system designed to erase people like me. Because I understood something important. In corporate politics, it's not about who did the work. It's about who can prove they did the work with irrefutable evidence. Dylan thought I was too naive to protect myself. He saw me as a workhorse, not a threat to his ambitions. That was his first mistake. His second was underestimating how much evidence one quiet analyst could gather in 60 days when she knew exactly what she was looking for. By the time the board announcement came, I had a file folder with irrefutable proof that every strategic insight came from me. Revenge wasn't the goal. Survival was. The company announced an emergency board review 6 weeks into our recovery project. The email from our CEO was terse and serious. All department heads will present their division's recovery plans to the board next Friday. This will determine our future as a company. Dylan smirked when he read the message, then immediately forwarded it to me with a note. Looks like it's showtime, partner. Make sure the final deck is ready by Thursday night. This is our moment to shine. Partner. That word made my skin crawl with disgust. We weren't partners. Partners share credit equally. Partners collaborate as equals. What we had was exploitation dressed up in friendly language and fake smiles. I responded professionally. I'll have everything ready on time. What I didn't tell him was that I'd already prepared 2 versions of the presentation. One for him to steal and present as his own. And one with my name on every single slide, sitting in my personal email account, ready to be forwarded to the board if absolutely necessary. You already know what happened in that meeting. Dylan stood confidently at the front of the boardroom, advancing through my slides like he'd created every single one of them. My silence, his glory, their applause. The CEO's effusive praise about how Dylan had single-handedly saved the company with brilliant strategic thinking. But what you don't know is what happened near the end of the presentation. One of the board members, an older woman named Catherine Brooks, asked for the original data file. I'd like to review the underlying assumptions in detail, she said calmly. Can you send over the source spreadsheet with all the calculations? Dylan didn't miss a beat. Of course. I'll send it over this afternoon. Catherine nodded slowly. Make sure it includes the full calculation methodology and data sources. I want to understand the complete foundation of this model. I watched Dylan's jaw tighten slightly, because he couldn't send what he didn't have. He didn't know the password to my master file. He'd never actually opened it himself. The next morning, Dylan stormed into my cubicle before I'd even finished my first coffee. His face was red. His tie already loosened like he'd been pulling at it anxiously. What the hell, Sloan? He hissed, leaning over my desk aggressively. Send me that source sheet immediately. Catherine Brooks is waiting for it and making me look bad. I looked him in the eye for the first time in months. Really looked at him. Not as my manager or my superior, but as exactly what he was. A thief caught without his stolen goods. Which one? I asked, my voice perfectly sweet and professional. The client retention model. The financial projections. The market analysis. We've built quite a few models over the past 3 months. His glare could have melted steel. You know which one. The main recovery model. The one I presented yesterday to the board. Oh, that one, I said slowly, deliberately. The password-protected file with all my calculations. Course. I'll send it right over. That was the first small win. His desperation was showing through the cracks. For the next 3 weeks, nothing happened on the surface. Dylan basked in his newfound glory like he'd earned it. The CEO announced his promotion to Director of Strategy at the company-wide meeting with great fanfare. There was expensive cake in the break room. Champagne toast. People congratulated me for having such a brilliant boss to learn from. Every compliment was a slap across the face. Every, "You must be so proud to work for Dylan," comment made me want to scream the truth. But I smiled through all of them, collecting my evidence quietly and methodically. I watched Dylan give interviews to the company newsletter about his vision. I saw him take meetings with senior leadership about his innovative approach to the company's future. I observed him hire 2 new analysts to replace me, since he'd be taking on bigger strategic responsibilities. Through it all, I kept my head down and my records meticulously updated. Because I knew something Dylan didn't. Catherine Brooks had questions. And she wasn't the type to let things go unanswered. An unexpected ally appeared in the 4th week after Dylan's promotion. Ellen Martinez, the HR director, stopped by my desk one afternoon with what seemed like a casual question about a benefits form. But as she was leaving, she paused and said quietly, "You're the one doing the real work, aren't you?" I froze, my fingers hovering over my keyboard. Ellen's expression was knowing, almost sad, like she'd seen this pattern play out before. She'd been with the company for 15 years. She'd witnessed this exact scenario multiple times. "I don't know what you mean," I said carefully, not wanting to admit anything. She glanced around to make sure no one was listening, then leaned in closer. "Dylan Shaw has gone through 4 analysts in 3 years. All brilliant women. All left the company frustrated and burnt out. You're not the first, Sloane. But maybe you could be the last if you're willing to fight." She straightened up, her voice returning to normal volume. "Keep your receipts," she said, tapping a folder on my desk meaningfully. "He's sloppy. They always are." Then she walked away, leaving me with the first real hope I'd felt in weeks. 2 weeks after his promotion, Dylan was preparing another board report, riding the momentum of his success with confidence. But there was a problem he couldn't solve. A data inconsistency had appeared in the follow-up analysis. Numbers weren't matching up properly. Projections were off by significant margins. The board was asking detailed questions Dylan couldn't answer because he hadn't built the original model himself. He couldn't explain the methodology because he didn't understand the underlying mathematics and logic. He showed up at my desk in a panic, all pretense of authority completely gone. "Sloane, I need you to fix something urgently," he said, practically pleading. "The quarterly projections aren't aligning with the recovery model. Can you take a look immediately?" I could have let him drown. Part of me desperately wanted to. But I helped him just like always. I fixed the inconsistency by updating the formulas and correcting his fundamental misunderstanding of how the model actually worked. But I also did something else. Something he'd never notice. I watermarked my work. Early. Invisibly. My initials, SP, embedded in the metadata of every major calculation. A week later, Catherine Brooks was reviewing Dylan's updated report when she noticed something odd in the file. Being the thorough board member she was, she'd opened the file properties to check the audit trail and version history. That's when she saw it clearly. Document created by Sloane Pierce. Last modified by Sloane Pierce. Over 40 track changes, all authored by Sloane Pierce. She mentioned it casually to Dylan in their next meeting, testing his reaction. "I noticed Sloane's name is all over the file metadata. Is this a collaborative project?" Dylan shrugged it off without thinking, without realizing the trap. "It's just company formatting. Sloane handles the technical execution. I provide the strategic direction and vision." Catherine nodded slowly, but she quietly forwarded the file to Ellen in HR and copied the legal department. "Please review the authorship and contribution records for the recovery project. I have serious questions about proper attribution." My name was now officially attached to the core project in the company's legal records. And Dylan didn't even realize what had just happened to him. 2 days later, Ellen invited me to join a private meeting with the CFO. No explanation, just a calendar invite marked confidential in red. I walked into the conference room with my heart pounding, not sure if I was about to be promoted or fired for causing trouble. The CFO was there with Ellen and Catherine Brooks. All 3 looked serious. They asked me to sit down. "Sloane," the CFO began, his voice professional but kind, "we've been reviewing the recovery project documentation in detail. We'd like you to walk us through your process. Not Dylan's summary. Your actual work and methodology." I took a deep breath and did exactly that. Calmly, precisely, I explained every step of my analysis over 3 months. How I'd identified the core problems causing client attrition through data mining. How I developed the predictive model to forecast which clients were at highest risk. How I'd created the retention strategies that had already saved 3 major accounts worth millions. The CFO nodded, taking detailed notes. "We might want you to brief the board next quarter about this." Dylan wasn't copied on that email. Right before the next quarterly board review, disaster struck for Dylan. He was preparing his presentation when he opened the file properties by accident. There, in black and white, was my name everywhere he looked. Created by Sloane Pierce. Modified by Sloane Pierce. Authored by Sloane Pierce. Every calculation traced back to me. He confronted me in the break room. His voice low and dangerous. His face red with rage. "You think you're smarter than me?" he hissed, stepping close enough that I could smell the coffee on his breath. Smiled. Not a friendly smile. A knowing one. "No, Dylan. I just think I remember who actually did the work." His hand tightened on his coffee mug so hard I thought the ceramic might crack under the pressure. "You'll regret this, Sloane. Made you. I gave you opportunities. And this is how you repay me." "You didn't make me," I said quietly but firmly. "You used me. There's a difference." He leaned even closer, trying to intimidate me. "No one will believe you. I'm the director. You're just an analyst." The quarterly board review came 3 days later. Dylan stood at the front of the room, trying desperately to project the same confidence he'd had in the first presentation. But this time something was different. The board members weren't just nodding along passively. They were asking detailed, probing questions. Catherine Brooks led the interrogation skillfully. "Dylan, can you walk us through the methodology behind your client risk algorithm?" He fumbled through a vague explanation full of buzzwords. The CFO jumped in. "And the data sources for your market analysis?" Dylan's answers got increasingly vague. Then came the request that broke him completely. "We'd like you to replicate part of the model live right now so we can understand your approach in real time." Dylan froze. His face went pale. He stammered something about not having his laptop configured properly. Then finally the words that sealed his fate. "Sloane handled that part of the technical work." Silence fell over the boardroom like a heavy blanket. Catherine turned to me with a slight smile. "Sloane, would you mind stepping in and explaining?" I walked to the front of the room calmly, plugged in my laptop and opened the project file. Every calculation, every formula, every data source was labeled with my complete audit trail. Version histories showing 3 months of my dedicated work. Detailed comments explaining my methodology. Timestamps proving exactly when each insight was developed. The room went completely still as I explained the model Dylan claimed to have created. I spoke clearly and confidently, answering every technical question with precision. 'Cause this was my work. I knew every detail, every assumption, every calculation by heart. When I finished my explanation, the CFO looked at Dylan with an expression I couldn't quite read. Catherine's face was harder to interpret, somewhere between disappointment and anger. One board member, an older man, leaned forward. His voice was quiet but sharp as a knife. "So, Dylan, if this was your project, why does every single file belong to Sloane Pierce?" The question hung in the air like smoke. That question destroyed him completely. "So, Dylan, if this was your project, why does every file belong to Sloane Pierce?" Dylan tried desperately to recover. He started talking about team collaboration, about how modern leadership meant empowering your team, about how he'd provided strategic oversight while I handled execution. But his voice lacked conviction. His explanations sounded hollow and desperate. Catherine interrupted him sharply. "Dylan, 3 months ago you told this board that you personally developed this recovery strategy. You said, and I quote, 'I pulled this strategy together in record time.' Those were your exact words." She pulled out a transcript from the previous meeting. "You didn't mention Sloane's name once. You didn't mention a team. You presented this as your individual achievement." Dylan's face flushed darker. "I misspoke. Obviously Sloane contributed significantly." "Contributed?" The CFO's voice was ice cold. "She created everything. You just presented it. There's a massive difference." Ellen spoke up for the first time, holding a thick folder I recognized immediately. "My documentation. HR and legal have been conducting a thorough review based on concerns raised by board members. We found a consistent pattern of Mr. Shaw claiming credit for work performed by analysts under his supervision. Specifically, we have documentation showing that Ms. Pierce created 97% of the recovery project, yet received zero attribution in any public communications. She slid the folder across the table to Dylan. This includes emails, version histories, witness statements from colleagues, and metadata from every file you've presented as your own work. The room was completely silent. Dylan opened the folder with shaking hands. I watched the color drain from his face as he saw the evidence I'd compiled meticulously over 3 months. Every email, every timestamp, every piece of proof that he was a fraud. "This is a misunderstanding," he tried weakly. But it was too late. By the next morning, his office was empty. The office buzzed with gossip for days afterward. People whispered in the break room about what had really happened in that board meeting. Some said Dylan had been fired for incompetence. Others heard it was ethics violations. A few knew the truth. He'd been caught stealing credit from the woman who'd actually saved the company. People avoided eye contact with me in the hallways, unsure how to react to the situation. Was I a whistleblower? A troublemaker? A victim? I didn't care what they thought anymore. Ellen stopped by my desk 3 days after Dylan's departure. She had a small smile on her face, the kind that said she'd seen justice done and was deeply satisfied. "You didn't need to raise your voice," she said quietly, settling into the chair beside my desk. "You just needed to let the truth speak loud enough. That takes more courage than most people have, Sloane." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak without crying. "He'll try to spin this," Ellen continued. "He'll tell people he left for better opportunities. But his reputation is ruined in this industry. Word travels fast." 2 days later, the CFO called me into his office. My heart raced as I walked down the executive hallway, passing Dylan's empty office with its bare walls. His assistant smiled at me warmly and gestured for me to go in. "Sloane, please sit," he said, closing the door behind me for privacy. "I want to start by apologizing on behalf of the company. What Dylan did was completely unacceptable. We should have caught it sooner and protected you better." He paused, then continued. "You kept this company afloat. Your work, your analysis, your strategies saved us from bankruptcy. We'd like to offer you a leadership position. Director of Data Strategy. You'd have your own team, a significant raise, and direct access to the executive leadership team." My hands trembled in my lap. I thought about that first board meeting, about watching Dylan steal my work while everyone applauded him, about the humiliation, the anger, the months of quiet preparation. "Thank you," I managed to say. "This time, I'll put my own name on the slides." He smiled. "I'd expect nothing less from you." Months later, I was scrolling through my phone during a coffee break when Dylan's name popped up on LinkedIn. His status had changed to open to work. His profile still listed the recovery project under his achievements, but someone had commented calling him out publicly. The truth was spreading through the industry. I didn't click on his profile. I didn't send a message or connection request. I just closed the app and walked out of my office into the Chicago sunlight, coffee in hand, ready for my afternoon meeting with the board. My own meeting, where I'd present my own work under my own name. Because I'd learned the most important lesson of my career. Never let anyone take your story. Quiet doesn't mean powerless. It means patient. It means watching and waiting for exactly the right moment to let the truth destroy all the lies. Dylan Shaw thought he could erase me from my own achievements. Instead, he erased himself from the industry. And I went from invisible analyst to director of strategy. All because I refused to let someone else write my ending. Sometimes the best revenge isn't confrontation. It's documentation.